November 17, 1348. The market square of Caerwyn heaves with bodies, peasants, nobles, priests, all gathered to watch a man torn apart alive. His name was Alaric Montclare, once the most powerful figure in England, the shadow behind the throne. Today, he will be mutilated and burned in front of thousands. But how did a noble boy rise to command a king, and end up meeting one of the most brutal deaths in history? Section 1. November 17, 1348. The bells of Caerwyn toll a heavy dirge, echoing through the mist that clings to the timbered roofs of the market square. The chill of late autumn has not deterred the crowds. From the great hall to the lowliest alehouse, people have poured into the square, merchants in thick wool cloaks, peasants clutching rough lanterns, friars whispering psalms, and knights with polished helms under their arms. They have come for a single reason: to witness justice, raw and merciless. At the square's center, a tall wooden scaffold has been erected, stark against the gray sky. Upon it stands a gaunt figure, dragged forward by the king's guards. His wrists are bound with iron, his face pale and sunken, his lips cracked from thirst. Once, his hair had been golden, carefully perfumed, a symbol of pride. Now it hangs greasy and matted across his brow. He is clad in rags that barely cling to his frame. Just 5 years earlier, Sir Alaric Montclare had been second only to the king himself in influence. He dined on silver, commanded armies, and bent nobles to his will with a whisper. Songs were sung of his victories in Wales. Women sought his hand, men feared his name. Now, he shivers in the cold, awaiting a death unlike any England has ever seen. A woman's voice calls out from the throng. "Look at him now! Look at the wolf who feasted on widows!" Others join in, hurling curses and rotten fruit toward the platform. Alaric does not flinch. His hollow eyes sweep the crowd with a strange calm. If he speaks, no one hears him above the roar of the gathering. On a raised dais sits Queen Eleanor, regal in a fur-lined mantle, her dark eyes fixed on the prisoner. At her side stands her ally and rumored lover, Lord Harrow of March, a tall figure in black armor whose hand rests easily on his sword. They do not speak, they do not need to. The entire kingdom knows this execution is their triumph. But to understand how Alaric Montclare came to this place of ruin, one must turn back the clock, to his youth among the noble halls, to his fateful meeting with a lonely king, and to the choices, each more ruthless than the last, that carried him higher than any courtier dared climb, and sent him crashing into hell. Section 2. Alaric Montclare was born in the year 1290, the second son of Baron Osric Montclare of Grayfen. The Montclares were not the wealthiest family in England, but their bloodline ran deep into the roots of the nobility. His mother, Lady Mirabell of Wexbridge, came from a house of scholars and clerics. From her, Alaric inherited a keen intellect and an ear for languages. From his father, he inherited something sharper: ambition, the kind that gnaws through restraint like a wolf through rope. Alaric grew up in the shadow of Caerwyn Castle, where stone halls echoed with the clang of arms and the whispers of politics. His elder brother, Rowan, was destined to inherit the estate, leaving Alaric with two choices: fade into obscurity, or carve out a destiny of his own. He chose the latter with the fervor of a man who would never accept second place. As a boy, he sparred longer than the other squires, his wooden sword clattering against steel until his palms bled. He devoured tales of Caesar and Charlemagne by candlelight, tracing each rise and fall as though studying the steps of a dance he meant to perform himself. By 17, Alaric was already known at tournaments for his reckless daring. "He fights," one knight remarked, "like a man who already believes the world belongs to him." And in many ways it soon would. In 1312, Alaric caught the eye of a new king, Edmund II. Edmund was not like his father, a stern warrior king. He was gentler, bookish, with a love for music and companionship. To the hard-edged barons, Edmund seemed weak. To Alaric, he was opportunity. At a hunting banquet in Windsor, Alaric maneuvered his way to the king's side. While others spoke of boars and bloodlines, Alaric spoke of philosophy, of the beauty of loyalty, of how history remembered not kings alone, but those who stood closest to them. Edmund, weary of mockery from the nobility, found in Alaric a rare balm, admiration without judgment. It began innocently, a game of chess in the king's private chambers, long conversations beneath tapestries, laughter shared over spiced wine. Yet, in those hours, Alaric secured something no other noble could, the king's trust. That trust soon became power. By 1315, Alaric had been made royal chamberlain, a role that gave him access to every secret of the court. From there, he began his climb, not by brute force, but by careful whispers, quiet deals, and an iron determination to never again stand in anyone's shadow. Section 3. To secure his footing at court, Alaric Montclare did what every ambitious man in England must. He married strategically. In 1316, he wed Lady Isolde of Thornley, a quiet but astute woman, and niece to the king himself. The union was less about affection than calculation. Through Isolde, Alaric gained sweeping estates in the lush valleys of Gwynfield, lands rich with wool and iron. Overnight, his coffers swelled. At first, he played the role of dutiful lord. He walked the fields with tenants, distributed bread during lean harvests, and sat piously through Massachusetts. But beneath the surface, ambition burned. Alaric wanted not merely to hold land, but to dominate it. He soon began pressing dubious claims against neighboring lords, arguing that long-forgotten charters gave him rights to their manors. When parchment could not win, intimidation did. Rival families awoke to find Montclare's men grazing cattle on their pastures, cutting timber from their forests. Widows who sought protection from the crown found their pleas buried. After all, Alaric himself was the king's chamberlain. His shadow stretches longer each year, muttered Lord Berwick of Anselm, one of many dispossessed by Montclare's machinations. But it was not only land he hungered for. Alaric began collecting enemies as quickly as estates, and soon, whispers spread, that he had the king's ear not merely in politics, but in bedchambers as well. King Edmund, unlike his iron-fisted father, had never been known for martial vigor. He surrounded himself with poets, musicians, and companions whose presence soothed him. In Alaric, he found both a confidant and a shield against the mockery of his barons. They dined together nearly every night. They hunted together. They lingered in private gardens long after the candles should have burned out. The court noticed. Some smirked behind goblets of wine. Others seethed. The barons had tolerated Edmund's eccentricities, but Alaric's influence over him grew unbearable. Decisions of state were funneled through Montclare. Appointments were made not on merit but on his approval. Isolde, Alaric's wife, endured the humiliation in silence, though her letters to her sister spoke volumes. "I share my table, my roof, my very husband with a king! And yet I am the one who vanishes from memory." By 1320, resentment at Alaric's power had reached a breaking point. Taxes swelled to fund his acquisitions. Rivals whispered of rebellion. And though Alaric ignored the growling of wolves beyond the gate, those wolves had begun to gather teeth. Section 4. The year 1321 marked the first great storm. The lords of the marches, long angered by Montclare's encroachments on their borderlands, convened at Shrewsford Abbey. By candlelight they spoke of his greed, of their lost estates, of the king's blindness. Lord Berwick of Anselm rose first, slamming a mailed fist onto the oak table. "Montclare has turned our king into his puppet," he declared. "We are not barons of England if we kneel to him as well as the crown." Others murmured agreement. The air reeked of wax smoke and conspiracy. That night, oaths were sworn, not against King Edmund, but against the serpent coiled at his side. News of the gathering reached Alaric soon enough. His spies, embedded in every household worth a silver penny, reported each grumble, each plot. Yet rather than retreat, he pressed harder. He demanded more land, forced loans from merchants, and even ordered the seizure of a convent's wool shipments, provoking outrage from the church itself. The tension snapped in midsummer. The barons raised banners, their retainers flooding the fields with steel. From Lincolnshire to the Welsh hills, rebellion blazed. The cry was not, "Down with the king!" but, "Down with Montclare!" For weeks, England trembled. Skirmishes erupted along trade roads, castles loyal to Alaric were besieged. Edmund himself tried to rally support, but few answered his summons. Too many saw him as weak, enthralled, lost to Montclar's whisper. By autumn, the tide could not be stopped. The rebels marched toward London. Edmund, terrified of civil war, was forced to choose: cling to Alaric and risk his crown, or sacrifice his chamberlain to appease the realm. The decision came in the great hall of Westminster. Surrounded by angry barons, Edmund sat pale and silent while Lord Harrow of March, then still a loyal voice of the opposition, spoke for them all. "Sire, England will not suffer Montclar's tyranny another day. Send him into exile, or we will send you into the grave." Alaric, standing just behind the throne, felt the air drain from the chamber. His jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. The king's voice broke as he answered. "Sir Alaric Montclare, for the peace of my realm you are banished." Gasps filled the hall. The serpent was cast out, stripped of title and office. But if the barons thought they had slain him, they had forgotten one truth: a banished man still has teeth. Section 5. Exile did not tame Alaric Montclare. It sharpened him. He crossed the Channel under cover of night, landing in Brittany with little more than a chest of coins and a handful of loyal retainers. For months he drifted between ports, drinking bitter wine and nursing his hatred. Yet Alaric was never a man to wither. If England had spat him out, he would return by force, and richer than before. He turned to the sea. With a fleet of hired vessels, Alaric began raiding English merchant ships. His banner, a black hawk with blood-red talons, became the terror of the Channel. Sailors whispered of his cruelty: cargo stolen, crews ransomed, and once, so rumor held, an entire vessel set aflame while he watched from his deck, arms folded, face impassive. The irony was bitter and delicious. Alaric plundered the very kingdom that had cast him out, swelling his coffers with English wool, French wine, and Flemish silver. In Cannes and Calais, merchants cursed his name, yet in the taverns of Dieppe, minstrels sang of the Lord of the Black Hawk. But it was not the sea he wanted. It was the throne's shadow. In 1323, fortune shifted. King Edmund, desperate to crush the Marcher lords who still rebelled against him, found himself cornered. His armies dwindled, his treasury bled dry. And who should send a letter across the waves but Alaric Montclare, offering ships, gold, and blades in exchange for pardon? The barons begged Edmund to refuse. But loneliness and fear gnawed at the king. None offered him counsel save flatterers, none risked loyalty save one man, though that man was in exile. Against all warnings, Edmund summoned Alaric back. The reunion was theatrical. Chroniclers record that as Alaric stepped ashore at Dover, the king himself rode to meet him, dismounting to embrace his former chamberlain. Witnesses claim Edmund whispered, "Never again shall we part." From that moment, Montclar's return was unstoppable. He reclaimed his estates, doubled his influence, and began punishing those who had cast him out. Beric of Anselm lost 3 manors overnight. The abbess who had spoken against him found her convent stripped of lands. By 1324, one chronicler wrote, "The king wears 2 crowns, one of gold, and one called Montclare." The barons had thought they had cut off the serpent's head. Instead, they had taught it how to strike harder. Section 6. For the next 4 years, Alaric Montclare ruled England in all but name. King Edmund signed the charters, but it was Montclare who decided their content. Nobles who once mocked him now bowed in silence, knowing their lands could vanish with a stroke of his quill. He sat beside the king in every council, his voice smooth, his gaze cold. When disputes arose between barons, they no longer pleaded to Edmund but to Alaric, who weighed their fates like a god of judgment. Some kissed his hand openly. Others gritted their teeth in silence. All obeyed. Montclar's appetite seemed endless. He confiscated estates under the guise of treason, taxed wool merchants to ruin, and even seized the dower lands of widowed countesses, claiming debts to the crown. "He strips the marrow from England's bones," wrote a monk of Canterbury. Yet the king, blind to all, continued to praise him. The rumors, too, grew louder. It was said that Alaric and Edmund shared not only counsel but a bed. In taverns, whispers grew coarse. The king is Montclare's wife. In churches, priests thundered against sodomy, thinly veiled sermons aimed at the royal household. Truth mattered little, the scandal itself was poison enough. None felt the sting more than Queen Eleanor. She had married Edmund at 14, a princess of France with beauty and wit. Once she had been cherished. Now she was sidelined, her influence stripped, her children raised under Alaric's watchful eye rather than her own. One winter's evening in 1325, Eleanor dared confront her husband in his chambers. Candles guttered against the draught as she stood before him, her silk gown rustling. "You let him take everything," she hissed. "My lands, my servants, even my sons. Am I your queen, Edmund, or a shadow you've forgotten?" The king looked at her with weary eyes, then turned his gaze to Alaric, who lingered by the fire. Montclare's lips curved into the faintest smile, as if victory itself warmed him. From that night, Eleanor's bitterness hardened into resolve. She began to plot in silence, writing letters in cipher to allies abroad. When Edmund sent her to France later that year to negotiate peace with her brother, King Philippe, she did not protest. For Eleanor, exile was not punishment, it was opportunity. There, across the Channel, she met a man who shared her hatred for Montclair, Sir Roland Mortain, a marcher lord once imprisoned at Alaric's order. In Eleanor's exile, Montclair had sown the seeds of his own destruction. Section 7. France proved fertile ground for vengeance. Queen Eleanor, armed with wit and wounded pride, found in Sir Roland Mortain not just a co-conspirator but a companion. Their alliance, some whispered, was sealed in both ink and passion. Letters passed between them like sparks, each one fanning the fire of rebellion. By spring of 1326, their plot had formed. With a modest purse of French gold and a band of hardened mercenaries, Eleanor and Roland prepared to cross the Channel. Their army numbered fewer than 2,000, but they did not need more. The realm's hatred of Montclair was an army waiting to be summoned. When their ships landed at Ravensport, the countryside erupted. Farmers abandoned plows to take up pikes, dispossessed lords unfurled banners long hidden. Even merchants opened their treasuries, eager to finance the overthrow of the man who had bled them dry. The speed of betrayal shocked Montclair. Castles once loyal turned their gates against him. Sheriffs refused his orders. Messages reached the king daily of allies defecting. Still, Edmund clung to him. One chronicler records a scene in the royal apartments at Caerwyn. "My lord," Alaric urged, pacing like a caged wolf, "the realm does not rise against you. They rise against me. If you stand firm, their anger will break like waves on stone." King Edmund, pale and trembling, shook his head. "But the stone cracks, Alaric. And if it falls, it will bury us both." Their answer was flight. With the royal treasury in wagons, Edmund and Montclair fled west, hoping the wild mountains of Wales might shelter them. Alaric's father, old Lord Osric, rode with them, still clad in the dented armor of his youth. The journey was chaos, retainers slipping away by the night, gold spilling into greedy hands, provisions dwindling. At Bristol, the old man was captured. Defiant even in chains, Osric was hanged from the city gate before dawn. His head was nailed above the portcullis, a grim promise of what awaited his son. Alaric pressed deeper into the hills with Edmund at his side, their world shrinking with every mile. Pursuers closed in from north and south, led by Roland Mortain and Eleanor herself, her banner of the fleur-de-lis fluttering above English fields. By November, there was nowhere left to run. At Neath Abbey, betrayed by local men eager for reward, Alaric Montclair and King Edmund were seized. The king would face deposition. Alaric would face something far worse. Section 8. The capture of Alaric Montclair was greeted like a festival. Bells rang in towns as news spread that the serpent had been seized. Farmers drank to his downfall, widows prayed in gratitude, and lords rode to Caerwyn to witness his judgment. The trial, if it could be called such, was little more than theatre. In the great hall of Hereford Castle, Alaric was dragged before a tribunal of barons, with Queen Eleanor and Roland Mortain presiding in gleaming seats of oak. The king, his king, sat nowhere in sight, already confined in the tower to await his forced abdication. The charges rattled off like a litany of sins: treason, extortion, theft of crown revenues, unlawful seizure of lands, corruption of justice, manipulation of the king, and the gravest of all, unnatural vice, the whispered sodomy that had stained his name for years. Alaric stood unshackled but gaunt, his once proud bearing stripped by hunger and flight. Yet when the herald read aloud, "That he did, in carnal fashion, debase our sovereign lord," Montclare laughed. "You spit lies," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "I served him more faithfully than any man in this chamber. And it is that faith you cannot forgive." Murmurs rippled. Some jeered, some fell silent. Eleanor's face did not change, but her knuckles whitened on the arm of her chair. Roland Mortain rose, towering over the hall. "You speak of faith, Montclare? You who bled England for coin? You who cast noble widows from their halls? Who imprisoned the Queen's servants and mocked the laws of God?" He turned to the tribunal. "He deserves not mercy, but a lesson carved into the flesh of every traitor yet unborn." The judgment was foregone. Guilty on all counts. His sentence was announced with deliberate cruelty. Death by public mutilation, to be carried out in the market square at Caerwyn within the fortnight. When the herald's words echoed into silence, Alaric closed his eyes and smiled faintly, as though confirming what he had always known, that his crime had only one possible end. That evening, chained in a damp cell, he whispered to the jailer who brought him stale bread, "They will make a show of me. But shows fade. Names endure." Section 9. November 17, 1348. The market square of Caerwyn seethed with bodies. Nobles wrapped in furs pressed shoulder to shoulder with peasants in rough tunics. Friars clutched crucifixes, merchants jostled for sight, children sat on rooftops. All had come to watch the fall of the man who had ruled them like a shadow king. At the scaffold's center, Alaric Montclare was dragged forward. His frame was skeletal from the hunger strike he had begun in his cell, a last attempt to cheat his enemies of their spectacle. But fate had denied him that dignity. He was forced to climb a ladder fixed against the platform, so all could see him high above the crowd. Upon his head the executioner placed a crown woven from nettles. "For the false king," cried the herald, "who sought to rule in our Lord's stead." The mob howled with laughter. Rotten vegetables flew, striking his chest and shoulders. Alaric did not flinch. His eyes swept the multitude like a hawk, calm and cold. Verses of condemnation were painted across his bare skin in ink, lines from Leviticus and the Psalms, condemning arrogance, greed, and lust. Then the torment began. First, his genitals were severed and cast into a brazier of coals. The crowd erupted in jeers, the symbolism plain, punishment for the unnatural vice, with King Edmund. Alaric's screams split the air, a sound so piercing that even some of his enemies turned pale. Still alive, he was slit from navel to sternum. His entrails were drawn out slowly, each length fed to the fire. Witnesses swore his cries turned into something beyond human, a wail that rattled through timber and stone alike. Only then was he hanged until senseless, and even that was not his end. His body was cut down, beheaded, and quartered. The parts were dispatched across the realm, an arm to Bristol, a leg to York, his head spiked above London Bridge. The crowd dispersed in rapture, believing they had seen justice itself enacted upon flesh. Eleanor and Roland watched from the dais, their faces solemn, triumphant. Thus ended Alaric Montclare, the hawk who had flown too close to the sun. Section 10. In the months that followed, the realm rejoiced. Queen Eleanor assumed power beside Roland Mortain, ruling in the young prince's name. They swore Montclare's stain was purged, his memory erased. But history has teeth. 4 years later, in 1330, the boy Edmund III came of age. Chafing under Mortain's dominance, he seized power for himself. In a swift coup, Roland was dragged before a scaffold much like the one Montclare had mounted. Though spared mutilation, he swung from the noose as a traitor. Eleanor, once the avenging queen, was stripped of power and confined to a quiet manor by the sea. Her triumph, like Montclare's, proved fleeting. And yet, centuries later, it is not Mortaine's name the ballads recall. It is Montclare's. Chroniclers still paint him as villain, as seducer, as tyrant. Plays cast him as the arch-courtier, scheming and doomed. But scholars whisper a more complex truth, that many charges were weapons of politics, that sodomy was less fact than slander, that ambition and love alike can be fatal when entwined with power. What is certain is this: his fall was no mere punishment. It was performance. Every cut, every fire, every screen was staged to cleanse the kingdom and remind all who watched that power is never free, that kings are never safe from the shadows beside them, and that when ambition soars too high, the fall is not just death, but spectacle. The tale of Alaric Montclare, the Serpent of Caerwyn, remains a warning whispered through the corridors of time. His bones are scattered, his crown of nettles long rotted, yet his story endures, how a man who sought to rule from the king's shoulder was dragged instead to the scaffold's edge, and broken for all to see.